Alrighty, traders, welcome to our weekly Outlook webinar. We're going to go ahead and jump right into things. This is our weekly Outlook for the last week of February 2018 going into March of 2018. This is my technical outlook for this week. I want to start off with the economic calendar. A couple things I just want you guys to take note of. There is a lot of high impact news for the dollar throughout this week. A little bit later today, we have some core durable goods orders, and we also have Federal Chair Powell testifying. He's actually going to be testifying twice this week, later today, and you can also see again on Friday. Among that, we also have some preliminary GDP coming out this week, quarter over quarter for the dollar, as well as core durable goods orders. Among that, there's some other high impact news we won't go over, but I also want to point out one thing is this Friday is the first Friday of the month, March 2nd, and we do not have non-farm payrolls this Friday. So NFP is not going to be until next Friday. Generally, we see it the first Friday of this month. This March, we don't see it until the second Friday of the month. So March 9th will be non-farm payrolls. Just something to keep in mind. Also, just from a more of a fundamental standpoint, as I mentioned, this is the weekly outlook for the last week of February going into March this week. So that means that our monthly candle is going to be closing. We look at our monthly candle and say like Euro USD, that means that this monthly candle is going to be closing. That we may see some manipulation in the markets as we generally tend to see come the end of each month. Now, this weekly outlook is going to be just slightly different than most. Most of you guys know I usually go over all of these pairs to the right. Rather than waste your guys' time going over some pairs that I'm really not even interested in trading in, I'm just going to go over the few pairs that I am interested in trading and give you guys my technical outlook, maybe some targets where I'm expecting price to reach this week. So I can give you guys the most valuable content in the shortest amount of time. On the dollar index, I want to let you guys know that my bias this week is primarily short-term to the downside. I just want to draw out and outline a couple things. So the Friday before last, so the end of not this past week, but the week before last, we saw a very strong bullish engulfing candle on the dollar index, a very significant bounce around a very significant demand level for the dollar index. Last week, as many of you guys know that watched our weekly outlook, my bias on the dollar index was expecting some bullish momentum on the dollar. I told you guys that last week, and I said that my target for the dollar index for last week was somewhere around this area, this previous resistance area where we saw a bounce off in the past, and we did see this target reached. Now, moving into this week, we can see the dollar index is beginning to create a range. We've seen the dollar index inside this range pretty much between the 88.50 and the 90 level for a couple weeks now. And this resistance, which is previous support from this bear flag over here, is proving to be a very significant zone for this pair. As long as this resistance holds, which I would be more biased to that happening this week, I think we're going to see some short-term downside on the dollar index. I mentioned this in the premium webinar a little bit earlier today, that I think we're going to probably see some short-term downside on the dollar, maybe another pullback, maybe a retest of this zone, maybe even a break of this zone, and then some long-term weakening on the dollar. Just to give you guys my long-term outlook, my 2018 outlook for the dollar, and also something like Euro USD, because if you guys have been following along with the correlations, you know that Euro USD literally does the exact opposite of what the dollar index does. Long-term this year, I would expect some further weakening of the dollar index, so just some further weakening of the US dollar overall, and some further strengthening of Euro USD. I think Euro USD is going to perform really well this week. I'm sorry, this year. Just from a fundamental standpoint, we are seeing a lot of investors moving money from US dollar equities into the emerging markets in Europe, because those emerging markets in Europe are doing very well right now. And I think that's going to create a lot of strength on the Euro USD this year. But other than that, that's my my short-term outlook for the dollar indexes. I'm looking for some weakness. Definitely watch the 90 area. If for some reason we do see this level broken, we see this resistance broken, then we may see some short-term strengthening on the dollar index up towards the 91 area or mid 91 area. But overall, my main bias would be looking at the dollar index staying inside of this range. I'll just quickly look at gold. Not super interested in trading gold, but obviously if we are looking at some weakness, or if I'm expecting some weakness on the dollar index, then I'm also going to be expecting some strength on gold. Okay, we know that whatever we see generally happen with the dollar index, we usually see the opposite of that happen with gold. Now, Euro USD, I am very interested in taking a position at some point this week. I'd like to see a little bit more confirmation before taking a position to the upside, but I think a long on this pair would not be the worst scenario. We're seeing this range on Euro USD, quite a strong range on Euro USD. We're also seeing a pretty significant level of support from a few different areas from where we're seeing price currently. I'd like to see some upside on Euro USD this week, just plain and simply because I'm expecting weakness on the dollar. And we know that if we see downside on the dollar index, we are also going to see upside on Euro USD. And vice versa, just like I said on the dollar index, if for whatever reason we do see that resistance on the dollar index broken, which would mean that this support right here on Euro USD would be broken as well to the downside, then we're probably going to be looking out for some short-term buys on the dollar as well as some short-term sells on Euro USD. But overall, the chart looks primarily bullish for Euro USD right now. I want to skip ahead to dollar yen. Dollar yen, I think, is a fairly clean chart right now. We had seen not last week, but the week before last. So this week right here, we had seen some very significant selling pressure on this pair. Very, very strong demand level of support on demand level, which is a support level for the dollar yen broken. Last week, we did see this area tested, like the 108 area retested and a rejection off this area. And this week, I think we're going to be looking for some more sells on dollar yen. Okay. And that is also based on my outlook and my bias of the dollar index weakening as well. Okay. Dollar yen, I think, still has some quite a bit of room to the downside. Just to put this on the weekly chart so you guys can see the wave that we're in, or the type of price action and market structure that we have right now. We previously saw a very significant drop from 2015 all the way until the beginning of 2017. Beginning of 2017 was fairly bullish, and then we went into a range for 2017 all the way until this year. We've been in a very significant range, and now we are breaking out of that range. I'd expect some pretty big moves to the downside on this pair, providing we see the 108 area that we just breached, not last week, but the week before last. We see this area now act as very strong resistance and price stay below this area. We probably should see some more selling pressure on dollar yen. So if you haven't figured out by now, pretty much my two most interested pairs to trade this week is dollar yen to the downside and Euro USD to the upside. That's pretty much all I want to focus on. It's going to be a pretty short weekly outlook. But I do want to look at USDCAD very quickly. Oil, if you guys don't know, oil and USDCAD tend to have a very negative correlation to each other. So generally speaking, when we see oil go up, we see USDCAD go down. As strong oil is obviously good for oil, right? That creates a demand for oil, creates prices to go up in oil, which, if you guys don't know, what the 63.85 is. That's how many US dollars for a barrel of WTI crude oil costs. So right now, 1 barrel of WTI crude costs $63.85. And if you guys do not know about Canada and Canada's economy, they have a lot of different factors that regulate their economy, but one big factor is oil. Canada's economy has a lot of impact on oil distribution. If you guys know OPEC, then you have some idea of how important oil is to Canada, but that's for another discussion. If you are new to this correlation, just understand that generally speaking, strong oil is a weak Canadian dollar. I'm sorry, a weak US dollar to Canadian dollar, which is a strong Canadian dollar. So we see a negative correlation between the two. And oil does look fairly bullish. Looks like it's ready to make another push to the upside. USDCAD, on the other hand, does look bullish if you're just looking at this move from the past few weeks. However, if you look at USDCAD as a whole, USDCAD is still very bearish. Some of you guys may or may not know that my long-term outlook on USDCAD is still down around 1.15. Okay, about 1,100 pips lower than where we are right now. I'm still expecting this target to be reached at some point this year. And mark my words, may not happen this year. Most likely is going to happen this year, but this target will be hit at some point. Now, just to backtrack a little bit and talk about just if you guys watched last week's weekly outlook. So the beginning of last week's weekly outlook, we were somewhere down in this range. And last week I told you guys I'm expecting buying pressure. So I told you guys last week I was expecting sells on Euro USD, which followed through. I was expecting the dollar index to rise, which we saw happen. I was expecting AUD USD to fall, which happened. I was expecting NZD USD to fall, which happened. And I was expecting USD CAD to rise, which happened. So I mentioned last week, that we had this previous range on USD CAD. And the support of this range was a pretty significant level. And I told you guys last week when price was all the way down here, that USD CAD was most likely going to come up and retest this range. Now that we've seen that target hit, I just want to look at selling pressure on USD CAD. I need a little bit more confirmation because obviously the past few weeks have been fairly bullish for USD CAD, but overall I would be looking for sells on USD CAD. So that is this week's outlook. I know I skipped over a lot of pairs, guys, but honestly, it's just a waste of time to go over those other pairs. I'm not really interested in trading them right now. This is really just what's relevant to me over the next few days as the week and month ends. So that's what I'm going to be looking for is potential buys on Euro USD, potential sells on dollar yen, and potential sells on USD CAD. So among the other pairs. And again, just keep in mind that there is a lot of high impact news for the dollar this week, as well as the weekly, of course, weekly candle will be closing at the end of the week, but we have the monthly candle closing at the end of, not tomorrow, but the next day. Well, it depends on where you are, right? Here in Australia, currently it's already the 27th. If you're in the States or elsewhere, maybe in Europe, it's the 26th. So tread lightly this week as usual. Use good risk management, use good risk to reward, guys. If this is your first time watching one of my weekly outlooks and you get some value out of this and this helps you with your trading, feel free to check out our website for the group that I offer to people. I do 4 other live webinars every single week aside from just this free webinar for the free group. So there's some more information on our website, which is positivetraders.us. The link is also in the description below if you're watching this recording on YouTube. So Other than that, guys, have a wonderful week. If you are a premium member, I will see you guys tomorrow for our daily live webinar. If you're a free member, I will see you guys next week on our free weekly outlook. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through social media, and have a wonderful week, guys. Take care.